Hello and welcome to Brickify, an exciting tool that allows you to create unique brick designs by a simple use of a button. So to start off, all you gotta do is just simply create yourself a mesh, any mesh, 2D or 3D. And then with it, I'm just going to go on to the material mode. With it, you can go and add a modifier, geometry nodes, and select the Brickify 3DT. And that's all it is to create a basic surface for a brick setup. Now this tool is more than just that. You can also set yourself up to create a unique custom designs using it. So for example, if I was to create a quick design using a circle, so this one over here, I'm just going to go on to edit mode and extrude a nice bit of a design like so. Then just going to go on to checker deselect, invert this selection, make sure we are within the median selection point, make a design something like this. We can then apply that same brick geometry node, just like that. And as you can see, we're going to get ourselves a very nice type of a design. Then afterwards, we can just place it on top of our already existing pavement over here. If we want to have more or less resolution for the bricks, we can do so. All we gotta do is just simply go on to scale, hold shift to make sure we are using a finer value, and then just simply drag it up or down to get different type of result. Just like that. Of course, we can also go back onto our mesh and adjust how this looks like and simply get ourselves the desired result. Now we can go back onto render to see how it looks like, and this is what we're going to get. If we want, we can also use a different collection of bricks. By default, it's going to use an object as a brick setup. We can also change this to be collection. Then the use can be selected. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and click on bricks, which you can choose from 3 variations, by the way. We have 3 different unique brick setups, a stone, a weathered bricks, and more of a stylized brick setup. I'm going to show how to use them in a minute. For now though, let's go ahead and use a simple brick collection. We can also change the material, and I'll show you why it's important in a second. But before that, let's go ahead and just select a basic brick basic like so. And this will give us the preset that we had over here as well. Then afterwards, if we go to render view, we can see that this is how it's going to look like. And let's say we want the bricks to be perhaps a little bit darker, a little bit brighter. We can totally do so. We can make a duplicate out of this material in Blender. And then afterwards, if we want to make the pavement, for example, darker, we can go on to shading mode. All we'd have to do is simply go on to the color ramp and change one of those arrows to darken it down to get a much more unique variation in comparison to the decoration on top. And just like that, we're going to get ourselves a nice setup. So maybe these size of bricks are not matching up within regards to size. Let's go ahead and fix that up real quick. I can either upscale this design, or I can go back onto the pavement and scale this down using shift and get a finer type of detail, just like that. This type of a geometry node will work with pretty much any of the objects, allowing you to add decoration onto them. So for example, this podium over here, we can go ahead and add a Brickify over it like so, and we're going to be able to get ourselves some nice bricks. To see the mesh itself, what we can do is we can go back on to show, and there are a couple of options. The base mesh will allow you to get yourself the base that we had before, whilst the wireframe will allow you to see the mesh in a wireframe mode. This will allow you to nicely adjust the mesh itself and see how it affects the overall setup. So we have something called type 2D and 3D. The 2D is great for a plain surfaces, and 3D is going to give you a different type of a warp for the objects, and this will help you to get more detail on the edges, especially for these type of meshes. So both of them will work on 2D and 3D, but 3D version will work better for the surfaces like this one over here. And going back to the setup, I'm going to hold shift and lower down the scale over here The reason I'm holding shift is to get myself more of detail, control that is, because this type of a setup is made for both large and smaller type of objects, which I'm going to show for a larger one how it works in a second. But all in all, you can see that just by scaling it down, we get ourselves some nice bit of detail. And we can use this with combination for edge padding and face size multiplier to get ourselves even more control on certain amount of bricks. So edge padding, if we start increasing it, we're going to lower this type of bricks, and you can see that we're getting ourselves some nice variation in regards to the setup. And just like this, we can add ourselves some extra bit of detail on top of meshes if we so want to, just by having a little bit of extra bricks placed around it is going to give us a nice setup. The other thing that we have is going to be face size multiplier. It works similar to edge padding, although it, instead of just taking off the scale of a surface area, it minimizes the overall of individual face, which if we start doing it, we can see that although it is turning much smaller, it is keeping that extra detail. So by combining these two together, we can get ourselves some interesting results just like so. Next up, we also have something called dissolve edges. This will allow you to get the edges in between the individual face to be treated as a separate individual object. And you can see that this will allow you to get these kind of patterns of individual parts of the mesh. So it's quite nice, especially when we're working with smaller amount of bricks like so. And if I was to get the edge padding a little bit higher up, we can see that this is what it's going to give us. I could even try to extend the face size multiply a little bit just to get ourselves a bit more randomness, just like so. Moving on, we have ourselves something called selection. This option will allow you to create some custom variations on where you want your surface to be used as a brick spawn. So for example, in this particular case, I want these parts in the middle to be empty. So maybe I could place in certain hatchets and whatnot for this sort of a tower. We can totally do so. All we have to do is make sure we have the selection ticked on over here. We're then going to go ahead and enable the input attribute toggle like so. And then the next step is going to be making sure that we do have ourselves a selection. Previously I used the brick selection, but by default it should be off like so. And then we're going to go ahead and go on to the vertex painting. We're going to make sure that this creates an attribute. We can rename it by double clicking on it on the top, calling for example brick selection like so. And all we need to do is just within the selection find what we have set. Before it was attribute, now it's brick selection. Let's go ahead and select it, and we're going to get ourselves the tower back. Then I recommend you to go on to edit mode and have the parts you want to disappear selected. Go on to vertex mode. With these selected, you can go on to vertex paint. After which, just make sure you have next to vertex paint the vertex selection on, which will allow you to only paint on the selected parts. And right now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and make sure we click X, which will flip between white and black. So now we're just using the black color. We're going to just click and hold and just go around this part over here. Maybe have a bit of a bigger brush. Let me try a bigger brush even so. And there we go. So we have the parts disappearing. And this way we can get ourselves some nice indent holes, just like that. So this one over here. And just like so, we're going to get ourselves nice areas for like hatchets and whatnot. So that's quite cool. And again, this is just a simple type of a mesh, just like that. Nothing serious, nothing too much overly complicated. I will say this, if you're planning to create a tower or whatnot, just make sure you delete the bottom part, as it will save up on some computational space and increase the performance overall. Finally, let's say you want to set yourselves up with a custom shape for creating a logo perhaps, or just a nice vector setup. So once we create ourselves a 2D version of a logo, we can go ahead and just simply add our own Brickify, and just like that, we're going to get this type of result. Then afterwards, we can play, for example, with the resolution, with scale. We can get ourselves this type of result, and we can get ourselves local scale as well, just to kind of lower it down, maybe get ourselves some nice gaps in between. If at some point it does break down in regards to these parts, for example, we can see that these two parts are actually separate. All we need to do is just within edit mode, we can just go ahead and click P, separate by loose parts, and that way we're going to get ourselves two separate pieces. And afterwards, if we want to, we can just simply reuse the same parameters. I'll show you how in a second. But firstly, I want to, for example, make myself a much nicer resolution. Something like this perhaps is going to look quite all right. Maybe a bit less. And I'm going to increase the local scale. If we want to go above a value of 1 for the local scale, we can do so. Just writing down 2 and just lowering down the resolution. We can also change up the brick layout by using the seed over here. This will randomize the overall setup. Just like that. And then afterwards, edge padding and face size, just to kind of play around with it to get more interesting result perhaps. Maybe I'll increase the scale a little bit, and I'll increase the face size for this one, just to get a more chunkier type of a result. Something like this, like that. And afterwards, if we want to have the same setup over here, just make sure to have everything selected. Have this last piece that we controlled and set ourselves up with to be selected last. Click Ctrl L and copy modifiers, and this will give you the same type of a setup. In this case, maybe I just want this to be just a little bit smaller, just like that. And we're going to get ourselves a nice setup. Yeah. The next thing is going to be, I'll show you how easy it is to set up a brick wall. If you want a nice edge type of a wall, for example, we can go ahead and do so. I'm going to go ahead and just move this around and set ourselves up with a shape. So for this one, I'm going to upscale it, add some bit of extra parts in here like this, and get myself every other one to be extruded like this, just like that, so we could get some edges for the walls. And afterwards, we'll also want to, for example, maybe set ourselves up with a wall that's crumbling on the side. We can go ahead and do so. I'm going to go ahead and just simply move this off to the side, just like that. And we're going to get ourselves a nice base setup. So with this, we can now go ahead and add ourselves a Brickify, just like that, and it's going to give us a very nice base shape. Perhaps this is a bit too big. I'm going to lower the base, the bottom, just like that. And the next thing is perhaps I'll want to upscale the bricks themselves. But before upscaling it, let's go ahead and test out our aged bricks. So we have a collection for bricks aged, which if we were to select it, nothing's going to happen. The reason being is that we also need to change up the material. So actually, it's not going to be bricks aged. It is going to be stone bricks. There we go. And then we're going to change the brick to be stone bricks material, like so. And now we can go ahead and start playing with the overall setup. Let's just make sure we do have the use from object set to collection, just like that. And this way, we're now going to be able to work with it. So you can see the scale, for example, might be a little bit off. We can go ahead and fix that by having local scale set to 5. And right away, we're going to get ourselves this result. And we're going to keep this as a 2D. The reason being is that we're going to be layering this down to get ourselves a much nicer outcome. So I'm going to increase the scale just a little bit more to get ourselves a nicer setup. Horizontal offset, let's make sure we have it. Well, it was set as a nice 0.5 by default. I'm going to increase the scale just a little bit. We're actually going to hold shift and just adjust it to something more manageable. Going to increase the face size multiplier to get ourselves more bricks in these areas over here, just like that. And maybe increase the edge padding just a little bit. So this is what we're getting. So the next thing is going to be to work with the offsets and gaps. So the horizontal offset, we already touched it. This basically offsets bricks. And sometimes we want more of a uniform type of a brick. Sometimes we want this to be more offset. For this type of a brick setup, we're going to use 0.5. Horizontal gaps is going to allow you to get you a bit of that extra edge on the side. So increasing it will allow you to get more gaps in between. And I can just go ahead and hold shift and increase it. We can see that we're getting more gaps like this. We can go down to negative size. For example, if I was to set it up -0.1, we can see that we're getting no gaps at all. But this might be a little bit too much. So I'm going to hold shift and just going to increase it just to something like this. I think this is looking quite nice. So the next step is going to be setting up the vertical gaps. Vertical gaps is going to be the same. Holding shift, we can make it a little bit offset like so. And we can do so just by a little bit. And the nice thing about this is that we can use the wall offset. So wall offset will allow us to, the default will allow us to just offset it from a plane, just like that. If we want to, we can do so. The random offset is going to be really helpful here because we're able to get those bricks nicely placed outwards, just like that. And I noticed that some of these bricks now are kind of off in regards to the setup. I'm going to go ahead and just adjust the shell padding a little bit, just like that. And we're going to get ourselves a nice type of a setup. So afterwards, we can do one of the either things. We can make a duplicate of the object and work with individual pieces as layers. Or alternatively, we can set this up to be as one object. So I'm going to go on to edit mode, going to click A, select it all, going to hit Shift D, escape, and GX just to move it off to the side until we get those bricks just like that. Then for this layer, I'm going to go ahead and just select the upper pieces for the top, since for this case, or actually this is going to look quite all right. I just need to make sure we have this offset a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and select this. Then click GY, just a little bit of an offset, just like that. It's going to give us a real nice type of a setup, as you can see like this. And afterwards, we're going to go ahead and click again, Shift D, GY, move it off to the side. Oh, sorry, GX, there we go. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and select the upper sections of each one of those bricks. If you're not seeing this, we can go ahead and just remove from edit mode. We can just work with planes. We can go ahead and then click delete vertices, and we're going to get ourselves more of a flat result, more of a flat surface. So this will give us a nice base, just like that. So this perhaps could be more of a walkway. So we can just move this off to the side, just like that, and get ourselves a nice brick setup. Then afterwards, if we, let's say, want to slightly weather it down, we can totally do so using the selection mode. So with the selection set to attributes, I'm going to go ahead and go to vertex paint. This should by default set me up with attribute. In this case, we can just go ahead and just use that attribute like so. And I'm going to make this much smaller. Going to go ahead and make sure this is set as black. And then afterwards, we can just go ahead and paint this down, and we can see that this way we can just weather down this type of a wall. If you're not happy with the result, we can go ahead and add more topology. We can just simply select it all and subdivide it like so. We can do it a couple of times to have more workable area with, and let's make sure that none of the bricks are floating, just like that. But by now tapping it lightly, we can get some of those bricks to be removed, just like that. And maybe on the front as well, for example, if we want this to be more randomized, we can totally do so. And that's pretty much it from this setup. All of these parts can be set up with custom textures. If you want, you can simply go ahead and select your item. So this one over here, let's say we want this to be its own object, you can go ahead and go to object and then convert to mesh. If you want to have a base, like for this one over here, a separate base underneath, you can do so. Just make sure you have a mesh preview set up. So in this part, make sure you have show base mesh set up. This, when converting it to a mesh, will allow you to keep the base mesh. And with that in mind, simply unwrapping it and putting it through Substance Painter, I was able to get some really nice results, just like that. Finally, you can use this in your own custom projects, architectural designs and whatnot as well. So for example, we have this large storage house over here. It looks quite bland. I simply separated this side from the roof, and we can just use the overall setup for the geometry node and apply the Brickify onto the sides just like that. And we're going to get ourselves super nice results. Let's just make sure that dissolve edges and type is set to 3D. Oh, sorry, I think dissolve edges needs to be ticked on like so. And yeah, that's going to give you a nice type of detail. And when you zoom in, for example, you can see all of the nice setup throughout the side of a building.